Hello and welcome to Lawd Lukan. In today's special true crime episode, we're going to look at a case which changed the face of British politics in the 1960s. It's a tale of serial killing, execution and lies. This is the story of Timothy Evans. It was the late 1940s in England, and we still had national service, so men aged between 18 and 40 were shipped off to fight in the Korean War. Fashion was starting to be about wrap skirts, and teddy boys were about to grease up the entrance to the fashion parade. Capitalism was busy being invented, and unemployment was low. Many parts of England were still in ruins following the Blitzkrieg a few years before, and the rationing of things like meat and sugar was coming to an end, and households still shared a single outside toilet. The most popular name for a baby was either Gordon or Linda, and you could buy an atom blanket, a lead-lined duvet which saves you from a nuclear blast. There was also a Miss Sewer Cleaner, and there was a problem with exploding chickens. A personal favourite of mine from this period is a story about a woman who was brought into court for setting the bed alight in her hotel. Her excuse was, "It was on fire when I got in it." Genius. It's the 30th of November 1949. And we're in Rillington Place, Notting Hill in London. It's a terrace house divided up into smaller apartments. Downstairs lived a couple called John and Ethel, and upstairs are Timothy and Beryl, and their daughter, Geraldine. Police are contacted by Timothy, who is telling them that his wife has died in unusual circumstances. He confesses that he'd given his wife an unknown substance from a bottle they'd bought from a mystery man, which had killed her. He told police that a few weeks prior, he had thrown their dead body into the sewer drain outside his house, arranged for John and Ethel downstairs to look after his daughter, while he disappeared off to Wales. When police attended the property, they found a body. Timothy was put on trial on the 11th of January 1950 for a single case of murder. And following an unsuccessful appeal in February that year, Timothy was hung to death on the 9th of March, aged 25. However, there was no body in the sewers, and the charge wasn't for murdering Beryl or the neighbours from downstairs. He was tried for the murder of his daughter Geraldine, but he was witnessed by many in his bar in Wales at the time of her death. 3 years after Timothy's execution, the world had continued to turn. Elvis had entered the building, Eagle Comics arrived with Dan Dare, and Sainsbury's had opened a shop. People had moved in and out of Rillington Place, and eventually John left too. Beresford Brown, who was now renting the apartment upstairs, was allowed to use the kitchen in John and Ethel's old flat, as hers had a bit of a problem with it. Here she found the bodies of Timothy's wife and daughter in a pantry which had been sealed off with wallpaper. Once police arrived and conducted a full search later that day, they found another 6 bodies. 3 in the garden, 3 under the floorboards in the front room, and the 2 bodies in the pantry. It's argued, of course, that there's 3 bodies, as there was also a 16-week-old fetus discovered in the cupboard along with Beryl and her daughter Geraldine. So what happened at 10 Rillington Place? It's now September 1947, and this is Beryl. 9 months ago she had a blind date with Timothy, and now they're getting married. In a few months she'll fall pregnant with her daughter Geraldine. Her relationship with her husband is stressful, and there's often physical violence. She's known to be terrible at handling the family's finances. Things are hard for Timothy and Beryl Evans. He has low literacy following a childhood illness, a criminal record for stealing a car, and an alcohol problem, all of which was making money and life very, very stressful. Beryl is struggling to keep the household together, but the heady mix of finances, violence and drinking was a great weight for her narrow shoulders. 2 years later, and Beryl has some news for Timothy. She's pregnant with their second child, but the news isn't welcome. The couple are buckling under the pressures of the world already, and they can't see a way of making it work. She decides it's best for them to terminate the pregnancy, but at this time the practice was illegal and culturally shameful. Her husband Timothy needed some convincing in order to agree with her. Beryl finds solace in the couple downstairs, John and Ethel, understanding, kind and sympathetic, and John offers to perform the procedure using a cocktail of chemicals. By all accounts, the couples got on very well. Here is a picture of Timothy, Beryl and their daughter Geraldine, and John's wife Ethel. Beryl died on the 8th of November 1949, and her body wasn't found until December 1952. She was wrapped in a tablecloth, and next to her lay the body of 13-month-old Geraldine. Timothy, who was in custody at the time, was confronted by police who showed him clothing that they'd taken from the bodies and described how they'd been strangled to death. But here's the slight twist. Although Timothy had confessed to the killing of his wife Beryl, this was the very first time that Timothy found out that his baby girl was dead. It's 1942 and a woman has just given birth to a baby boy, and she calls him Timothy John Evans. Timothy's dad left a few months before he was born, leaving the mother alone with him and his older sister Eileen. He has learning disabilities and following an accident had several operations which kept him out of school for a while and meant that his education suffered. And even in later life he would need people to be able to read documents to him. He was also said that he was a terrible liar, prone to inventing stories about himself in order to increase his own self-esteem. Fast forward now to 1949. Timothy and Beryl aren't getting on. Timothy has an anger problem fueled by his alcohol abuse, and Beryl isn't looking after the family's affairs very well. But Timothy is happy when he finds out that his wife is pregnant with their second child, but she convinces him that the termination is the best route. Timothy and his wife befriend the couple downstairs, John and Ethel. He and John share a passion for the same football team. After explaining the predicament to the neighbours, it's agreed that John would perform the termination while Timothy was work as a truck driver. Returning home drunk as usual, he found John, who had terrible news for him. It explained to Timothy that Beryl had died during the procedure and the best course of action was for John to dispose of the body while Timothy laid low in Wales. Geraldine would be looked after by some friends in a place called East Acton. After 2 weeks, Timothy was missing his daughter and went back to Rillington Place to see her, but he was met by John, who refused. He waited another 2 weeks, all the time no sign of his daughter, until another 2 weeks when he confessed to the police that he was responsible for his wife's death. As the case went on, Timothy changed his plea from guilty to not guilty, stating that he was made to confess by police officers and that the murderer was actually somebody else, even though during the initial trial no bodies had been found and vital evidence was not filed. They were working on a case where they were going to try a man based on his word, not on evidence, as at this point neither Beryl or Geraldine had appeared. Timothy's admission for his responsibility of Beryl's death was enough to establish his guilt for the murder of his daughter Geraldine, and he was sentenced after a jury took just 40 minutes to find him guilty. The case was appealed in February 1950 before Lord Chief Justice Lord Goddard, who dismissed Timothy's story as being fantastic, and he was hung at Pentonville Prison in March later that year. This is John. He's the neighbour downstairs, and he used to be a police special constable. John is the youngest of 7 children, brought up in a house where punishment was swift and severe. The son of a famous carpet designer and described as being not very popular, John was gifted in maths and won a scholarship to his secondary school. After leaving school, he found work as an assistant projectionist, and in 1917 he went off to fight in the Second World War, but was injured in a mustard attack and demobilised in 1919, returning to service in the Royal Air Force in 1923, but he was discharged 8 months later. John married his wife Ethel in 1920, but unfortunately he was impotent and spent a great deal of time visiting prostitutes. In fact, when he was at school, people used to tease him and call him Reggie Little Willie. Ethel sadly miscarried, which caused the couple to part for a few years, during which time John was in and out of prison for a variety of violent offences. And lastly, one of the charges involved him hitting a man in the head with a cricket bat. But a few years later, John and Ethel got back together, and in 1934 they moved to Rillington Place, where they met Timothy and Beryl. They became close with the couple upstairs. They knew that they were struggling with money and offered them much sympathy, care and attention. And once their relationship was cemented, John offered to perform the illegal termination surgery, and Timothy left for work. John murdered Beryl, her unborn child, and their daughter Geraldine, wrapped them in tablecloths and hid their bodies in a pantry, which he wallpapered over to hide. John's first murder was in 1943. A prostitute by the name of Ruth, who was buried under the floorboards in his front room, and soon after, he quit his job with the police force. His second victim was called Muriel and was killed using domestic gas. John had been working on a process where he would take a jar that he would tell the person would cure their bronchitis. One pipe would lead to a person, whereas a separate pipe would lead off behind them. While sitting there, John would connect the second pipe to the gas in his kitchen. The person would then succumb to the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning, which at the time was 15% of the domestic gas content. After inhaling, Muriel became unconscious, where she was sexually assaulted and strangled. John then took Ruth's body from the front room and Muriel's and buried them both in the back garden. And in the morning of the 14th of December 1952, John strangled his wife as she lay asleep in bed. Between January and March 1953, he murdered more than 3 women: Kathleen, a prostitute, Rita, a visitor from Belfast, and Hectorina, who was looking for a house for her and her boyfriend when she was lured into 10 Rillington Place. Every murder was committed using the same gas technique John had been perfecting, the effects of which would cause drowsiness followed by unconsciousness. He would collect samples of each person's pubic hair, but oddly, one sample didn't match any of the hair of the bodies that were found at 10 Rillington Place. You could suggest then that that means that there's more murders, but an argument against this is that he wouldn't have changed his method of killing or deviated from the killing in his own home, which is a consistent fact with serial killers. They establish their method and they stick to it, perfecting it, caring for it even. John pled insanity at his trial, and the jury took 85 minutes to decide his fate, rejecting his claims and sentencing him to death by hanging. And at 9 a.m. on the 15th of July 1953, John swung from the gallows in Pentonville prison. It's said that just before he was hung, he told the executioner that he had an itchy nose, and the executioner replied, "It won't bother you for long." Coincidentally, the hangman was the same Albert Pierrepoint that had hung Timothy years earlier. In 1966, the then Home Secretary Roy Jenkins had a full inquiry and announced to the Parliament he was granting Timothy a pardon and awarding Eileen, Timothy's sister, compensation. Now, if a man is executed within the prison walls, he would be buried in the grounds. So John was exhumed and returned to his family, who have buried him in a private grave in St Patrick's, London. Since this case closed, this case has been made into films, there's been books, so much talking about it. But it seems that every now and then a little bit comes dripping out, like the sore that never quite healed for British justice. We'll never know why Timothy confessed the way he did. Some say it was guilt due to leaving the family. Some say it was a cover-up to protect John. A compelling angle that has been raised is the idea that Timothy did kill his wife and then left for Wales thinking that John would cover it up for him and then return to find his life's love had been erased and the guilt was too much. Particularly if he didn't know that John was a serial killer, he might be of opinion that his ex-police officer friend might have been able to help him out. The only murder John never confessed to was that of Geraldine. One rationale behind that is that if John was to be pleading insanity, he would be spending a great deal of time behind bars. And therefore, if he admitted to killing a child, this would make his stay incredibly difficult and leave him at the mercy of other inmates. When John was a child, he visited his dead grandfather, who was lying in state. He remarked that seeing him gave him a great sense of power and well-being, as the person that had caused him so much fear throughout the course of his life was now just simply a corpse in front of him. I would have liked to think that Geraldine would have been in the same position, looking at John's corpse. Sleep well, Geraldine, for the devil sleeps tonight. Thank you for watching. It's an old story, but I'm hoping it was presented in a new way. I've got more indelible stories coming, so I'd love you to subscribe, click the like. Have a beautiful day. Love to my 3. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.